The splintered wood tore at your insides, a slow, deliberate violation that began not with a swift, merciful blow, but with a dull, insistent pressure. You felt it climb, a foreign tree growing within your own flesh, pushing past bone, past organ, until a scream, raw and unformed, clawed its way out of your throat, ripping the fragile fabric of the autumn air. It was not a scream of terror, not yet, but of pure, unadulterated agony, a sound so primal it seemed to strip away everything human, leaving only a quivering, suffering beast. You were hoisted, slowly, agonizingly, as the stake, sharpened to a dull point, found its purchase, not to pierce vital organs immediately, but to thread its way through the soft tissue just beneath the skin, following the spine's curve, a monstrous internal guide. The process was painstakingly slow, sometimes taking hours, sometimes even a full day, for the victim to finally expire. The sun beat down, indifferent, on the market square of Targoviste, where the air hung thick with the metallic tang of blood and the coppery stench of fear. Around you, dozens, scores, perhaps hundreds of others shared your fate, their bodies slumped or struggling, impaled on stakes that jutted from the earth like a macabre, leafless forest. Their moans, their choked gasps, their final rattling breaths formed a horrifying symphony of despair. Some were still alive, eyes wide with incomprehension and suffering, their bodies slowly sliding further down the greased timber, their own weight hastening their demise. Crows, bold and black, had already begun to circle, their cause a counterpoint to the human misery, their shadows dancing on the faces of the dying. The executioners, grim-faced men whose eyes held a chilling emptiness, moved among the victims, occasionally prodding a stake, ensuring its trajectory, or perhaps simply prolonging the torment. This was the justice of Vlad III, Prince of Wallachia, a man whose name would forever be whispered with a shiver, a man known to history as Vlad the Impaler. And this, you realized with a sickening lurch of your stomach, was a fate far, far worse than a swift death. It was a lingering public spectacle of unimaginable pain, designed not just to kill, but to break the spirit, to crush the very idea of resistance, to instill a terror so profound it would echo through generations. How, you might ask, could a man, born of noble blood, raised within the complex, shifting allegiances of medieval Europe, become such a chilling architect of human suffering? What kind of crucible could forge such an absolute, unyielding indifference to the pain of others, transforming a prince into a butcher, a protector of his people into their most feared tormentor? To understand the monster, one must first endeavor to glimpse the boy, the prince, the human being who existed before the shadow of impalement fell across his soul. Rewind the tapestry of time, not to the blood-soaked fields of Wallachia, but to a grander, yet increasingly precarious world. Vlad III. Dracula was born in the winter of 1431 in the ancient Saxon city of Sighișoara, nestled within the mountainous heart of Transylvania. His father was Vlad II Dracul, a formidable warrior and a member of the powerful Basarab dynasty, who would later become the Prince of Wallachia. The name Dracul, meaning dragon, was bestowed upon his father when he was inducted into the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric society founded by Emperor Sigismund of Hungary. This order was dedicated to defending Christendom against the relentless expansion of the Ottoman Empire, a looming shadow that stretched eastward, ever threatening to engulf the small, fractious principalities of the Balkans. Young Vlad, the second of three sons, spent his earliest years within the relative comfort and privilege of a princely household. He was a small boy, perhaps a bit too serious for his age, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail of his surroundings. His elder brother, Mircea, was boisterous and prone to youthful mischief, while his younger brother, Radu, possessed a delicate beauty and a gentle demeanor. Their childhood, though punctuated by the constant undercurrent of political intrigue and the distant rumble of war, was not entirely devoid of innocence. Vlad would have played in the courtyards of the princely residences, perhaps with wooden swords, mimicking the knights and warriors he saw around him, listening to the tales of heroic deeds and ancient legends. He would have learned the rudiments of courtly etiquette, the importance of lineage, and the delicate dance of power that governed the lives of the nobility. Tutors would have instructed him in Latin, Slavic, and German, in history, philosophy, and the martial arts. He was taught to ride with skill, to wield a sword and spear, and to understand the intricate strategies of warfare, skills deemed essential for any young man destined to rule. His father, Vlad II, was a complex figure, a man caught between the hammer of the Ottoman Empire and the anvil of the Hungarian kingdom. Wallachia, a fertile land of plains and forests, was strategically vital, a buffer state that both powers coveted. To survive, Vlad III was forced to perform an agonizing tightrope walk, pledging fealty first to one, then to the other, constantly shifting allegiances in a desperate bid to preserve his principality's fragile independence. This constant prevarication, born of necessity, would later be interpreted by his son as weakness, as betrayal, a seed that would fester in Vlad III's heart. The year 1442 marked a devastating turning point, a moment that irrevocably shattered the remnants of Vlad III's childhood and set him on a path of unparalleled darkness. His father, in a desperate attempt to secure his position and perhaps to appease the rising power of the Ottoman Sultan Murad II, made a fateful journey to Gallipoli. He was accompanied by his two younger sons, Vlad and Radu, then aged 11 and 7 respectively. What began as a diplomatic mission quickly devolved into a horrifying trap. Sultan Murad II, weary of Walachia's wavering loyalty and eager to ensure its submission, took the Drakul family captive. While Vlad II was eventually released, forced to swear a new oath of fealty and to pay an annual tribute, he was compelled to leave his two young sons behind as hostages. It was the ultimate leverage, a chilling guarantee of his father's future obedience. This forced captivity in the Ottoman court was the true psychological genesis of Vlad the Impaler. Imagine young Vlad, a proud, sharp-witted boy, suddenly ripped from his family, his home, his language, and thrust into the opulent but terrifying heart of an alien empire. He was a prisoner, albeit a princely one, in a land where he was an outsider, a pawn in a brutal game of power. The gilded cages of the Ottoman court were still cages, nonetheless. He witnessed firsthand the absolute, unquestioning authority of the Sultan, a ruler whose word was law, whose power was absolute. and who could dispense life and death with a mere flick of his wrist. He saw the swift, brutal justice meted out to those who displeased the Sultan. Beheadings, flayings, impalements, public displays of dismembered bodies. These were not abstract concepts from history books, they were daily realities, chilling lessons in the efficacy of terror as a tool of governance. He lived in constant fear, a gnawing dread that never truly receded. He was surrounded by strangers, by rivals, by the constant threat of perceived insult or misstep. His younger brother, Radu, adapted more readily to the lavish, sophisticated Ottoman court, even converting to Islam and reportedly becoming a favorite of the future Sultan Mehmed II. This deeply wounded Vlad, seeing his brother embrace the very culture that held them captive, viewing it as a profound betrayal of their lineage, their faith, and their Wallachian identity. While Radu seemingly found a measure of comfort, perhaps even affection, in his new surroundings, Vlad grew sullen, withdrawn, and hardened. He nursed a simmering resentment, a burning hatred for his captors, and a profound sense of abandonment by his father. He felt utterly powerless, a feeling that would fuel his later obsession with absolute control. Flashback to a small, richly decorated room within the sprawling Topkapi Palace. Young Vlad, no longer a boy, but a gaunt, intense youth of 15, sat hunched over a scroll, his eyes scanning the intricate Arabic script, though his mind was far away. He could hear the distant rhythmic thud of the Janissaries training, the shouts of the guards, the exotic music drifting from another courtyard. His stomach clenched. He recalled the day, just weeks prior, when he had witnessed a particularly gruesome execution. A captured rebel leader, defiant to the last, had been slowly flayed alive in the public square, his screams echoing off the ancient walls of Constantinople. The crowd, a sea of faces, had watched with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. Vlad had been forced to watch too, his captors ensuring he understood the consequences of rebellion. The image of the man's raw, exposed flesh, the sickening smell of blood and fear, had seared itself into his memory. He had seen the absolute terror in the man's eyes, and in that moment, something shifted within Vlad. He understood that terror, when wielded effectively, was the most potent weapon of all. It was not enough to defeat an enemy. One had to break their will, to erase any thought of future defiance. His captivity lasted 6 long, formative years. 6 years of watching, learning, simmering. 6 years of being subjected to the whims of others, of feeling the cold hand of powerlessness. He learned the Ottoman language, their customs, their military tactics, and most importantly, their methods of maintaining order through fear. He learned patience, cunning, and the art of dissimulation. But beneath this veneer of adaptation, a dark seed of vengeance and an unshakable resolve to never again be weak or beholden to anyone took root and began to grow. He vowed that if he ever regained power, he would wield it with an iron fist, crushing any who dared to challenge him, eliminating any perceived threat with a brutality that would make his enemies tremble. While Vlad endured his captivity, the situation in Wallachia had deteriorated further. His father, Vlad II Dracul, continued his desperate dance between empires. But in 1447, the delicate balance finally snapped. John Hunyadi, the powerful Hungarian regent, launched a campaign against Wallachia, believing Vlad II had betrayed Christian interests by allying too closely with the Ottomans. The outcome was swift and brutal. Vlad the Hun Dracul was ambushed and murdered in the marshes near Balteni, along with his eldest son, Mircea. Mircea, it was said, was buried alive, a cruel and agonizing end. The news of his father's and brother's deaths reached Vlad in his Ottoman captivity. It was a moment of profound despair, grief, and incandescent rage. His family shattered, his father murdered, his brother tortured. All, in his eyes, due to the shifting loyalties, the perceived weakness that had left them vulnerable. This cemented his psychological wound, the deep-seated conviction that only absolute, unyielding power exercised with ruthless efficiency could protect one's domain and prevent such betrayals. He saw his father's attempts at diplomacy as fatal flaws. He would not make the same mistake. He would be feared, not just respected, but utterly, absolutely feared. Here's where it gets truly dark. The Ottomans, perhaps seeing a malleable pawn, released Vlad in 1448 and even helped him claim the Wallachian throne, hoping he would serve their interests. His first reign was short-lived, lasting only a few months before Hunyadi ousted him. Vlad fled, becoming a wanderer, seeking refuge in Moldavia, then Hungary, always plotting, always learning. He spent years in exile, honing his political acumen, studying military strategies, and, most importantly, cultivating a network of allies. His time in Hungary brought him into contact with some of the most brutal military minds of the age, men who understood the necessity of cruelty in a world rife with constant warfare and betrayal. He would have heard stories, perhaps even witnessed, different forms of torture and intimidation. The lessons of his Ottoman captivity, far from fading, were only reinforced by the harsh realities of exile. He saw that power was taken, not given, and maintained through strength and fear. It wasn't until 1456, 8 long years after his first fleeting taste of power, that Vlad finally returned to Wallachia and, with Hungarian support, reclaimed his rightful throne. He was 25 years old, a man forged in the fires of captivity, betrayal, and exile. The gentle boy was gone, replaced by a grim, determined, and deeply scarred ruler. His eyes, once merely sharp, now held a cold, unwavering intensity. He was no longer Vlad, son of Dracul. He was Vlad Draculia, the dragon's son, and he was ready to rule. His first order of business was to consolidate his power and to exact a terrible revenge upon those whom he perceived as responsible for his father's and brother's deaths, and for the instability that plagued Wallachia. The boyars, the powerful Wallachian nobility, had a long history of shifting allegiances, often assassinating princes who displeased them and installing more compliant rulers. Vlad saw them as the embodiment of the weakness and betrayal that had cost his family so dearly. He also held a deep suspicion for the Saxon merchants who lived in the Transylvanian towns bordering Wallachia, believing they often conspired against Wallachian interests and engaged in illicit trade. He saw all of them as internal enemies, cancers that needed to be excised. But that wasn't even the worst part. His method of dealing with these perceived threats was unprecedented in its scale and brutality, a chilling echo of the lessons he had learned in the Sultan's court. The most infamous incident, one that would cement his reputation, involved the boyars. Sources vary on the exact date, but it is widely believed to have occurred around Easter of 1459. Vlad invited hundreds of boyars and their families to a grand Easter feast in Targovishte. The atmosphere would have been one of deceptive conviviality, the tables laden with roasted meats, fine wines, and fresh bread. Laughter and conversation would have filled the princely hall, the boyars perhaps believing they were cementing their relationship with the new young prince. Then the trap sprung. As the feast reached its height, Vlad's guards, grim-faced and heavily armed, burst into the hall. The doors were barred, the windows sealed. The festive atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a sudden, terrifying silence, then by the rising tide of fear. Vlad, standing at the head of the table, his face impassive, addressed his guests. He accused them of various transgressions, of complicity in his father's murder, of betraying Wallachia, of sowing discord and weakness. His voice, though calm, cut through the sudden hush like a sharpened blade. He singled out the older boyars, the men whose hands were stained with the blood of past princes, men whose loyalties had always been for sale to the highest bidder. These were the ones who had engineered the constant instability, the puppet masters behind the princely assassinations. The older boyars, along with their families, were immediately seized. They were not given a swift execution. Oh no. Vlad's justice was far more elaborate, far more agonizing. They were taken to the outskirts of Targovishte, to the very spot where the cold open of our story began. There, under the indifferent gaze of the spring sky, they were impaled. The stakes were carefully chosen, not too sharp, not too blunt, and often greased with fat or oil to ensure the slow, excruciating penetration. The process was designed to prolong life, to maximize suffering, to ensure that death was a slow, public spectacle of agony. For hours, even days, they writhed on the stakes, their screams echoing across the plains, a horrifying warning to any who might contemplate disobedience. The younger boyars, those whose hands were less stained, were spared this immediate, agonizing death. But their fate was perhaps even more cruel. Vlad, never one to waste resources, put them to forced labor. He marched them, along with their families, on a grueling journey from Targovishte to Poenari, a remote mountainous region. Their task, to rebuild and strengthen a dilapidated fortress, now known as Poenari Citadel. It was an arduous, back-breaking undertaking, performed with inadequate tools and under the constant threat of Vlad's guards. Many perished from exhaustion, starvation, or exposure during the forced march and the subsequent labor. Their fine clothes were torn, their hands calloused and bleeding, their bodies broken. This was Vlad's way of breaking their spirit, of stripping them of their pride and power and forcing them to literally build the foundations of his new absolute rule. This forced labor, this slow, deliberate destruction of their former lives, was a torture of a different kind, a psychological torment that eroded their very sense of self. Vlad's methods were not limited to impalement, though it remained his signature. He employed a horrifying array of tortures, each designed to inflict maximum pain and psychological terror. He would boil people alive, slowly simmering them in large cauldrons until their flesh peeled from their bones. He would flay them, stripping the skin from their bodies while they were still alive, leaving them as raw, quivering masses of flesh. He ordered the cutting off of noses, ears, and eyes. He would nail turbans to the heads of Ottoman envoys who refused to remove their headwear in his presence, a chilling assertion of his authority. He would feed children to their mothers or force parents to eat their own children. He delighted in public displays of these atrocities, often dining calmly amidst the dying and the dead, sometimes even dipping his bread into the blood of his victims. He reportedly found amusement in the contorted faces and agonizing cries of those he tortured, a chilling testament to the profound psychological damage he had endured. One of the most chilling anecdotes, widely recounted, tells of a visiting foreign merchant who, upon entering Targovishte, found himself unable to bear the stench of the impaled bodies and held his nose. Vlad, observing this, ordered the man impaled on an even higher stake, remarking that he would be closer to the fresh air. This story, whether entirely true or embellished, encapsulates the capricious, unyielding, and utterly merciless nature of his justice. He tolerated no dissent, no disrespect, no challenge to his absolute authority, no matter how minor. His rule was characterized by an almost pathological obsession with order and honesty. He detested theft, deceit, and moral laxity, punishing these transgressions with unimaginable severity. There are tales of golden cups left unattended in public squares, their safety guaranteed by the sheer terror of Vlad's justice. Beggars and vagrants were rounded up, offered a lavish feast, and then burned alive, Vlad reportedly claiming that he had cured them of their suffering and rid the land of idleness. This brutal enforcement of order, while perhaps bringing a certain stability to Wallachia, came at an unimaginable human cost. The land was quiet, but it was the silence of fear, the stillness of a graveyard. His foreign policy mirrored his domestic brutality. He was a staunch enemy of the Ottoman Empire, a deep-seated hatred born from his years of captivity. He saw the Ottomans as an existential threat to Wallachia and to Christendom, and he waged a relentless, often brutal war against them. In 1462, he launched a devastating campaign across the Danube, raiding Ottoman territories, massacring tens of thousands of Turks and Bulgarian Muslims, and bringing back vast amounts of plunder. He wrote to Matthias Corvinus, King of Hungary, boasting of having killed over 20,000 Turks, not counting those who were burned in their homes. He sent Corvinus 2 large sacks filled with the severed heads of his victims, a gruesome trophy of his ferocity. This campaign, while initially successful, provoked the wrath of Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, the same man who had once been Vlad's childhood companion in captivity. Mehmed, a brilliant and ruthless military commander, decided to personally lead a massive Ottoman army, perhaps 100,000 strong, into Wallachia to depose Vlad and annex the principality. It was an overwhelming force, far outnumbering Vlad's much smaller, though highly disciplined, army. What happened next would haunt the Sultan forever, a moment that stands as one of the most chilling acts of psychological warfare in history. As the Ottoman army advanced through the Wallachian countryside, they encountered a desolate, scorched earth landscape. Vlad had ordered the burning of villages, the poisoning of wells, the destruction of crops, denying the invaders any sustenance. His small forces harassed the Ottoman flanks, launching hit-and-run attacks, sowing confusion and fear. But even this was not Vlad's ultimate weapon. As the main Ottoman army, led by Sultan Mehmed II himself, approached the Wallachian capital of Targovishte, they were met with a sight that stopped them dead in their tracks. Before the city walls, stretching for miles along the banks of the river, was a horrifying spectacle: the forest of the impaled. It was an immense, ghastly display of human suffering and death, a testament to Vlad's absolute brutality. 20,000 impaled corpses, Turks and Wallachians alike, stood erect on stakes, their bodies slowly decaying under the summer sun. Men, women, and children, their bodies twisted in agonizing postures, their clothes tattered, their eyes empty sockets, formed an unspeakable testament to Vlad's resolve. The air was thick with the stench of death and decomposition, a smell so potent it burned the nostrils and turned the stomach. Crows and vultures circled overhead, occasionally swooping down to feast on the carrion. The sight was so utterly grotesque, so profoundly shocking, that even the hardened veterans of the Ottoman army, men accustomed to the brutality of war, were reportedly sickened and demoralized. Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of mighty Constantinople, a man who had seen countless battles and horrors, rode among the impaled, his face reportedly pale, with a mixture of horror and grudging admiration for his enemy's chilling effectiveness. He had come to conquer, but he found himself confronting not just an army, but a psychological weapon of unparalleled power. The forest of the impaled was not just a battlefield. It was a testament to the ultimate expression of terror, a message delivered with sickening clarity: "This is what awaits you if you defy me." The psychological impact on the Ottoman army was immense. The advance faltered. Morale plummeted. The soldiers, already weary from the long march and the constant skirmishes, found their will to fight eroded by the sheer, overwhelming horror of the scene. They were not just fighting a prince. They were fighting a demon, a man who seemed to relish in death and suffering on a scale previously unimaginable. Despite this horrifying display, Mehmed II, a man of iron will, did not immediately retreat. He entered Targovishte, only to find it deserted, its inhabitants having fled or been forcibly relocated by Vlad. The city was a ghost town, stripped bare of anything that could aid the invaders. Vlad, knowing he could not defeat the Ottoman army in open battle, continued his scorched earth tactics and launched a daring, desperate night attack on the Sultan's camp. Under the cover of darkness, his small force infiltrated the massive Ottoman encampment, seeking to kill Mehmed II himself and sow utter chaos. Though the assassination attempt failed, the attack inflicted heavy casualties and further rattled the already demoralized Ottoman forces. The combined effect of the impaled forest, the scorched earth, and the relentless night attacks proved too much. Sultan Mehmed II, a pragmatist, recognized that continuing the campaign would be too costly in terms of men, resources, and morale. He had encountered an enemy whose methods transcended conventional warfare, a man who had mastered the art of psychological terror. Mehmed, famously, is said to have remarked that he could not rule a land governed by such a man who could inflict such horrors. He turned back, abandoning his direct conquest of Wallachia. Instead, Mehmed installed Vlad's younger brother, Radu, the Handsome, on the Wallachian throne. Radu, who had spent his life in the Ottoman court and embraced their culture, was a far more palatable choice for the Sultan. He was seen as a cultured gentleman, a stark contrast to his brutal older brother. With Ottoman backing, Radu quickly gained support among the Wallachian boyars and common people, who were utterly exhausted by Vlad's reign of terror and the constant warfare. They yearned for peace, for stability, even if it meant submission to the Ottomans. Vlad, abandoned by his Hungarian allies who had grown weary of his excesses and facing a population that had turned against him, was forced to flee Wallachia once more. He sought refuge in Hungary, only to be imprisoned by King Matthias Corvinus, who perhaps feared Vlad's growing power and uncontrollable brutality, or perhaps simply yielded to Ottoman diplomatic pressure. He spent another 12 years in captivity, though this time his imprisonment was more lenient, allowing him to marry and even participate in some military campaigns. Yet the fires of vengeance and the deep-seated paranoia never truly extinguished within him. His final return to power was brief, a mere few months in 1476. With Hungarian and Moldavian support, he once again reclaimed the Wallachian throne. But the land was weary of war, and his brutal reputation preceded him. Wallachia remained a battleground between the Ottomans and their Christian neighbors. Not long after his return, in late 1476 or early 1477, Vlad was killed in battle, likely ambushed by Ottoman forces or by disloyal Wallachian boyars. The exact circumstances of his death remain shrouded in mystery, a fitting end for a man whose life was so deeply intertwined with darkness and violence. His head was reportedly severed and sent to Constantinople as a trophy for the Sultan, a final, grim irony for the man who had reveled in decapitated heads. The legacy of Vlad the Impaler is a chilling testament to the profound and enduring human cost of trauma, paranoia, and absolute power. His story is not merely a tale of historical cruelty. It is a psychological excavation into the depths of what happens when a human being, subjected to years of fear and powerlessness, decides that the only way to survive, to rule, to prevent being a victim, is to become the ultimate tormentor. His childhood captivity under the Ottomans, witnessing and experiencing the methods of terror, instilled in him a twisted philosophy that fear, not love or loyalty, was the only reliable foundation for power. He saw his father's oscillating allegiances as weakness, leading to his demise. Vlad's response was to eradicate all perceived weakness, all dissent, all potential for betrayal with a ferocity that bordered on the genocidal. His brutal tortures, far worse than a quick death, were not random acts of sadism, but a calculated, deliberate strategy. Impalement, flaying, boiling, dismemberment. These were not merely punishments. They were theatrical displays of absolute authority, designed to shatter the will of his enemies and instill a paralyzing terror in his subjects. The forest of the impaled was the ultimate expression of this philosophy, a landscape of horror intended to break the spirit of an invading army, to make them question their very will to fight. And in that, for a time, he succeeded. But the price was immeasurable. He secured his principality's temporary independence from the Ottomans, yes, but he alienated his own people, who eventually sought relief from his tyranny in the arms of his gentler, Ottoman-backed brother. He became a legend, but a legend of monstrous cruelty, a name whispered in fear through the centuries. His life asks us a timeless and uncomfortable question. Can a ruler truly protect his people if he must first terrorize them into submission? Does extreme violence, even when born from a desire for order and defense, ultimately corrupt the very soul of the one who wields it? Vlad the Impaler's story reminds us that the line between a defender and a despot can be tragically thin, especially when forged in the fires of personal trauma and political instability. His methods were a desperate, brutal response to a brutal age, a horrifying mirror reflecting the violence he himself had endured. The screams of his victims, echoing through the annals of history, serve as a stark warning that while the pursuit of absolute control might offer a fleeting sense of security, it often leads to an abyss of human suffering, proving that some tortures are indeed far, far worse than death itself, leaving scars not just on the body, but on the very fabric of history and the collective memory of humanity. The terror he inflicted, born from his own terror, became a cyclical nightmare, a chilling lesson in the enduring power of fear to shape both individuals and nations, a lesson that continues to resonate with a cold, hard truth even today. The terror he inflicted, born from his own terror, became a cyclical nightmare, a chilling lesson in the enduring power of fear to shape both individuals and nations, a lesson that continues to resonate with a cold, hard truth even today. But what of the man himself, in those moments of chilling calculation, when he decreed such unspeakable fates? Did Vlad ever truly grapple with the monstrous reflections staring back from the pools of blood that stained his reign? Or had the boy who witnessed the flaying in Constantinople, the youth abandoned to his captors, the prince whose father and brother met agonizing ends, become so utterly consumed by the need for control that all empathy had withered and died within him? He often sat, a solitary figure, at a table positioned strategically on a rise overlooking the impalement fields. It was said that the stench, a putrid blend of human waste, decomposing flesh, and the coppery tang of fresh blood, did not bother him. Indeed, some chroniclers, perhaps embellishing for dramatic effect, claimed he found it invigorating, a testament to his absolute power. He would eat his meals there, his plate piled high with roasted boar or succulent lamb, his chalice filled with Wallachian wine, while the moans and gasps of the dying drifted up to him on the breeze. His eyes, dark and unblinking, would sweep across the macabre landscape, observing the various stages of agony, perhaps seeking patterns, perhaps merely confirming the efficacy of his methods. In his mind, there was no contradiction, no moral quandary. He was not a sadist for the sake of sadism, he would have argued had anyone dared to question him. He was a surgeon, cutting out the cancer from the body of Wallachia. The boyars, with their perfidy and their constant plots, were the festering sores. The thieves and liars, the parasites who preyed on the honest folk, were the disease. The Ottoman invaders, the relentless tide threatening to engulf his homeland and his faith, were the plague. And his chosen method, impalement, was simply the sharpest, most effective the scalpel at his disposal. He had learned from the Ottomans, yes, but he had refined their techniques, elevated them to an art form of terror. He had seen their power, understood their ruthlessness, and decided that to fight such a formidable foe, one must become even more fearsome. He was a shield, he believed, a living bulwark against the forces that sought to destroy his people, and if that shield had to be forged in the fires of human suffering, then so be it. The suffering of a few, or even of many, was a necessary sacrifice for the survival of the whole. This was the dark logic that governed his every action, a logic warped by the crucible of his own traumatic past. Consider the common folk, the peasants and merchants who lived under his draconian rule. They moved with a peculiar quietness, their eyes downcast, their voices hushed. The marketplace, once a vibrant cacophony of bartering and gossip, was now subdued, its hum muted by an invisible shroud of fear. No one dared to cheat, for the punishment for even minor theft was often a gruesome public display, a hand severed, a foot impaled. Doors were left unlocked, gold cups lay untouched, not because of an inherent honesty, but because the alternative was unthinkable. The very air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next decree, the next wave of executions. Ion, a grizzled carpenter from a small village outside Targoviste, remembered the day his neighbor, old Grigore, a man known for his gentle demeanor, but also for his occasional pilfering of firewood from the communal forest, was taken. It wasn't the usual swift justice that had been common before Vlad. Grigore was marched into the village square, his face ashen, his hands bound. The village priest, Father Andrei, tried to intervene, begging for mercy, citing Grigore's age and his family. But the guards, their faces like stone, merely pushed the priest aside. A stake, freshly cut and crudely sharpened, was driven into the ground. Ion watched, his heart a cold knot in his chest, as Grigore was slowly, deliberately, hoisted onto it. The old man's screams, thin and reedy at first, then rising to a guttural roar, pierced the morning air. They lasted for hours, a chilling testament to the efficiency of the executioners. Ion, like everyone else, stood frozen, unable to look away, yet desperate to erase the image from his mind. That night, his wife, Elena, held their children close, whispering prayers, her face streaked with tears. "He is protecting us," she murmured, half convincing herself. "From others who would steal. From the Turks. He protects us." Ion, however, could only see the terror in her eyes, a terror that mirrored his own. He knew that the protection came at an unbearable price, a price paid in the agony of others, a price that could one day be demanded from any one of them. The Church, a powerful institution in Wallachia, found itself in a precarious position. Vlad was ostensibly a staunch defender of Christianity against the encroaching Muslim Ottoman Empire. He funded monasteries, built churches, and presented himself as a pious ruler. Yet, his methods flew in the face of Christian teachings of mercy, forgiveness, and the sanctity of human life. Priests and monks, though horrified by the widespread atrocities, rarely dared to openly condemn him. To do so would be to invite the same brutal fate. Instead, they often found themselves in the agonizing position of offering last rites to the condemned, their voices trembling as they prayed for souls destined for a prolonged, agonizing death. Some, like Father Andrei, would try to intercede, only to be met with Vlad's cold, unwavering gaze, a gaze that promised swift and terrible consequences for anyone who questioned his divine right to administer justice as he saw fit. Vlad saw himself as God's instrument, chosen to cleanse Wallachia of its sins and its enemies, and any opposition to his will was an opposition to God's will. His time in Hungarian captivity, after being deposed by Radu the Handsome, was a peculiar interlude. King Matthias Corvinus, while holding him prisoner, also recognized Vlad's formidable military skills and his unwavering hatred for the Ottomans. Vlad was not kept in a dungeon, but in relative comfort, allowed to marry a Hungarian noblewoman, a cousin of the king, and even to participate in campaigns against the Turks. This period, far from softening him, seemed to solidify his convictions. He saw it as a time of forced reflection, a period to refine his strategies, to understand the intricacies of European politics, and to patiently await his moment. He would have observed the Hungarian court, their struggles, their weaknesses, and their strengths, all through the lens of his own brutal philosophy. He learned to play the long game, to cultivate alliances, to present a more palatable, albeit still formidable, image to his European benefactors. But beneath the surface, the core psychological wound, the need for absolute control, and the conviction that terror was the only true path, remained firmly entrenched. He never forgot the taste of power, nor the agony of losing it. Radu the Handsome, Vlad's younger brother, presented a stark contrast. He was indeed, as his epithet suggested, a man of refined tastes and agreeable temperament. Having grown up in the Ottoman court, he had absorbed its culture, its language, and its diplomatic nuances. He was a charmer, a man who preferred negotiation and alliances to impalement. The Wallachian people, exhausted by Vlad's reign of terror and the constant warfare, initially welcomed Radu with a cautious hope. Here was a prince who promised peace, stability, and a return to some semblance of normalcy, even if it meant a degree of subservience to the Ottoman Sultan. Radu's rule was indeed less brutal, less arbitrary, but it also lacked the fierce, unyielding independence that Vlad, for all his monstrousness, had championed. Radu's Wallachia was a vassal state, a pawn in the larger Ottoman game, while Vlad had always sought to be a king unto himself, even if it meant becoming a demon. This contrast underscores a deeper truth, that sometimes the most effective resistance to tyranny, however brutal, can be replaced by a gentler form of subjugation, a trade-off between overt terror and insidious control. The very landscape of Wallachia bore the scars of Vlad's rule. Beyond the physical remnants of impalement fields, which eventually faded into fields of wildflowers, there was a deeper, more insidious mark left on the collective psyche of the people. A generation grew up understanding that even a whisper of dissent could lead to unimaginable pain. Creativity, independent thought, and open expression were stifled. People learned to be cautious, to be silent, to trust no one outside their immediate family. This long-term societal impact, the erosion of trust and the deep-seated fear of authority, would linger for generations, subtly shaping the character of the region. It was a silence born not of peace, but of profound trauma, a forced conformity that masked deep-seated anxieties. When Vlad finally returned for his last brief reign in 1476, the land was not filled with rejoicing. There was a grim acceptance, a weary resignation. The people knew what his return meant: renewed war with the Ottomans, renewed brutality, renewed demands for absolute obedience. His legend had grown in his absence, a terrifying specter that haunted the forests and mountains. He was no longer just a prince. He was Dracula, the son of the dragon, a creature of myth and horror. His death, a few short months later, whether by Ottoman blade or by the treachery of his own boyars, brought not grief, but a profound, if unspoken, sigh of relief across Wallachia. The terror was over, at least for a time. The enduring fascination with Vlad the Impaler is not merely a morbid curiosity. It is a profound reflection on the human capacity for both immense suffering and unimaginable cruelty. His story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of justice, the allure of absolute power, and the long shadow cast by childhood trauma. He sought to create a perfect, orderly society, free from crime and corruption, and safe from foreign invaders. But in his relentless pursuit of this vision, he transformed his principality into a charnel house, his methods a terrifying mirror of the very barbarity he sought to suppress. His tale is a timeless narrative of how a desperate need for control, born from profound personal violation, can metastasize into a reign of terror that consumes not only the victims, but also, ultimately, the tormentor himself. It reminds us that the quest for security, when pursued through the systematic dehumanization and torture of others, inevitably leads to an even deeper insecurity, a constant fear of reprisal, and a profound isolation that no amount of power can ever truly alleviate. The echoes of those screams, the smell of the blood, and the sight of the impaled forest serve as a chilling, enduring testament to the dark alleys of the human soul, a grim reminder that some wounds, once inflicted, can fester and poison generations, creating a legacy of suffering that truly is worse than death. The tales whispered about him, embellished over centuries, evolved into the vampire myth, not just because of the Dracul name, but because his acts sucked the very life and hope from his subjects, leaving behind a land drained of its vitality, a true testament to a history utterly tortured by the man known as Vlad the Impaler.